Alrighty, so it is time to do week 2 attendance for CIT85, HTML, and CSS. And you're watching the video from me where I'll introduce what you need to do this week. So what you're going to do is first watch the video you're watching now, code along with chapters 1 and 2, and I'm going to show you in this video what that means. Okay, and I've given you a link here to the Markdown, the instruction file. If you've never dealt with Markdown, it's something that's very common to use. It's not markup that you're learning, it's Markdown. And then for the grading for what you're about to do, there's nothing you need to do in the post, in the reply, but as part of my grading, I will review your commits and code. Okay, so I'm going to leave this video just to cover these two, and then I'll come back and probably do a video for just what you need to do for the reply. Okay, let me show you my setup. One thing is this file, if you click on it and look at it, is in a repo in our GitHub organization, and this file is w2html.md. And you'll see that pattern as we move through each week. And I name it for the week that we're in and the topic that we're covering. So in this case, this entire file is going to cover chapters 1 through 5. But for attendance, you just need to do chapters 1 and 2, and then we'll talk about your experience and any questions that you have when doing at least 1 and 2. And then for the next video, the official code along for this week, we'll do the rest of the chapters. Okay, just to set it up. Now the way I write the instruction is basically I go through and watch and code along with Dave, and then I add in some instruction I want you to do. Sometimes I'm summarizing or saying make sure you pay attention to a specific topic. But here's what the formatting will look like. Okay, so for this week's 2 attendance, this is a repeat of what I just said, chapters 1 and 2. So notice how chapter 1 starts at the beginning and goes to 12 minutes 44 seconds. Now if you scroll up, and I didn't say this, but I have it loaded already in the file, in my tab. Now one thing that can happen here is that sometimes, and let's actually click on here, this actually just clicking on here, and it's something I need to, I'm glad I did this because it reminds me I need to put a little context here, but I'll actually tell you here, right click, open in a new tab, and that way you have, and in this case it's Dave Gray, and I talked about it when the week welcome, the week 0 welcome, that we were using Dave Gray for both the HTML and the CSS. And so what you can see by just rolling your mouse down below here is there's chapters, right? So here's chapters broken in to, you know, the different topics that Dave is going to cover. And in our case, we're going here. But you don't think that all you're doing is only doing that code, because for me, I have specific things and commits, and you learned about commits last week with the Git local dev environment setups. Okay, so just FYI. And by the way, if you scroll down as well when you come here, if you scroll down further, there's a couple things you can see, which is these chapters broken into links. So if you're, as we move forward with the content, you want to go to a specific part, you can do that as well. And then Dave also provides, let's see, I think is right here. Let me see. And I'll talk about this kind of in a little bit. And I went ahead and opened it. And again, it was from the video down here where he actually gives a link to the code. So I like that he provides the code, but just know that our structure will be different, and just copying his code won't give you the points for the work. But I like that he provides them. That way you can go back and look. Okay. So that's my setup. Now the other thing is, before we get started, is that I have my VS Code open. Now for me, my VS Code is loaded on my local system. For some of you, that means your VS Code and therefore your dev environments are open on CodeSpace. So you need to make sure that you have those open. I've shown how to do that last week. If you need help, make sure you ask. But I'll show you, for me, I have it loaded on my local Mac system, and when I come in here, the thing I will get once VS Code opens here is it'll open my last setup. And one of the things I do is I come in, and because this is actually my base folder, I had you create this for you. You should see your public and your private. I see other things here because I have other folders set up. But one thing I do is I generally will open just the repo that I'm working in, just to kind of make my life easier. And you'll see this as we go into the other code along. So I'm going to do open folder. Now this is only true for those of you working locally. If you're working out on CodeSpace, you actually have two different code spaces, one for your private and one for your public. I'm going to go ahead and open my private repo where I've already done some of the work that you're about to do. Okay, so reminder for those of you new in my class, when we're working on the private repos, this is only stuff, only you and I see the work here. Okay, when we're working on public, which we will do for next week's attendance, then we will be doing work where everyone will see that. Okay, and let me just come back now to here. So that's my setup that I have right now as I'm looking at this. And one of the things you're going to see as you start to work through this week 2 attendance, chapter 1 and 2, is just learning to navigate all the different pieces of the course. And so, because like I said, Dave is going to just go over everything in one shot. He's not going to have you stop and do, commits that you learned last week, but I will. Okay, so just to give you that setup. So in here, Dave will also, and you can see this in his course, his HTML, he does this by lessons, but I don't, because I want you to have the code for the HTML in one folder. So coming back, and by the way, the other way you can navigate tabs is you can do, in this case, depending on your system, I can do on my Mac Control Tab, and it will move me through my tabs. And I think that's a good way to do it. I can also do, for me, Command, or maybe for Windows for you, and I can move through my VS Code. I can move to my Chrome, and in this case, I can move through the different windows that I need to have access to. Now, I'll show you in a minute kind of how I set up my screen real estate, which is something we'll be talking about in attendance. Okay, so here's the time mark for the first chapter, and one thing I recommend is actually just reviewing the work that you're about to do. So in the first part of this, I've broken it down from the beginning to 12 minutes 44 seconds. Then I have you do a commit, and then we break it down to the rest of chapter 1. Okay, and in there you watch and you'll do some more coding, but in that case you won't have a commit until after you've started in chapter 2. Okay, so just get used to that, and again, it'll take a little bit of time, and then when you finish this last commit here, then you have finished your requirements for attendance. Okay, and again, when you do this, the way I'm going to show you how to do code-alongs will be you give your commit history, but because this is attendance and everyone sees it, you don't have to give that here, but you'll be talking about it in a minute. And I just want to clarify that because sometimes that can be a little confusing. Okay, I'm going to come back to the instruction file now. And so let's actually scroll back up. Okay, one thing, as I just talked about, Dave is going to have his work, and you'll see this in his video where he has folders for each lesson, but what we're going to have is folders for each week. And I think we're going to end up getting through the HTML in possibly 3.5 weeks, depending on how things flow. Okay. All right, so what you're going to do, and this is actually here, right? So Dave in this very beginning, so you'll watch, and then Dave is going to talk about installing Chrome. Definitely recommend Chrome on your system if you absolutely don't want to, as long as you can do all the things that I show and that Dave shows as far as looking at the code and getting into what's called dev tools, or in that case, dev-like tools. I really wouldn't know. It's just what I recommend. He recommends something like the dark tab for Chrome. This is optional. VS Code, he talks about you already have it because of what you did last week. And this is where we talk about a different folder structure. Now, I did talk about that in the beginning here, but here's the step where Dave will actually talk about the photo. So I want to show you what it looks like on my system. So in here, for my private repo, again, I'm on my local. Your code space may look a little different. When you click into your code space and you click on either file or folder. And again, Dave shows you this, but I think seeing it twice, especially for those that are new, is really helpful. So if I click here, what happens is it creates a folder there. Now, I've already created the folder, but for you, I want you to see, and then you would name that. Now, it's really important for my work that you actually follow my naming conventions. Lowercase is no spaces. Now, I'm using an underscore here, which is totally fine, but you don't use spaces, okay? So I just want you to know that I'm a stickler for naming conventions, okay? And I talk about that here. Our file and folder naming conventions will be this. There is an exception, of course, because that's the way life goes. And it's going to be called a README file, which I think I will talk about in the code along for the rest of the chapters. So you'll code along with Dave, do the basic HTML code, and then he'll talk about some other extensions. And there's a specific thing he talks about, and extensions, I'll just give you a little preview. If you come over here and then you can search for the one I'm telling you not to install, which is Prettier. Now, Prettier is nice. But for the purposes of HTML validation, and I'll talk about that as well, it's not recommended, although there are ways to get around some of the issues. But more than importantly, I just want to show you here, this is where you see extensions. And the extensions are just software that somebody wrote that's added to your VS Code that is local. And so I'm going to move from extensions back to files, and here I am, okay? And so definitely, and I've already actually talked about this in the setup, is having auto save on, because in that case, if you don't, you have to save. And you will see Dave when he's actually working in here. Oh, it looks like I have it on. In this case, Dave actually has his auto save off, and then he has to save each time. Okay. So now, when you get to the last part, oh, actually, there is icons and GitHub theme. Again, these are optional. Autosave is definitely recommended. And then the last thing is required, which is live server. Again, this is an extension. Dave will show you how to do it. But once you have everything flowing, and again, I'll just give you a little preview of what this looks like. And I'm going to move to my local setup. I'm going to come here. And I'm going to click on and you will end up doing this work in the code along. I'm going to right click and open in live server. And when I do that, then I get the output of the HTML. Now that's what live server gives you. And again, it's an extension that you will install. And there's multiple ways, and I like that Dave actually shows this. And you can see I have the uninstall, which means I have it installed. I have it running, which shows which port it's on. Again, these are things that you're doing a little pre-learning here about what Dave's going to cover. Okay, so once you do that commit, then you will actually pause the video right after you do the commit. So you do, and at this point, you can look back on what I showed you about git add, git commit, and then this is your commit message. So part of what I grade in this case is, did you do all the code and did you get the commit message correct? Now, if you got to this git message and you did the git add and the git commit, but you realize you missed something, just do another commit and tell me in the name, I forgot a step. Okay. And if you can always give me notes, because I understand that in the beginning of this, it can take quite a bit of just kind of understanding the setup and the way you do things in this course. Okay, so Dave will actually, when you start back on chapter 1, continue coding, he'll actually code up the CSS file. Now, in this case, he first ends up putting it in the head section, and then later he creates an external file. But then he talks about this W3C validator. Oh, and actually notice what happened there. When I clicked on it, it actually took the tab with my instruction. And those are good examples of when you see links like that, right click, open in a new tab, and then you have that. Now, there is no problem with doing it this way, where you actually have to go to your setup and then navigate to your, let's see, I have it here. I'd have to go here. I'd have to go here and click my file. Now, again, he'll show you in more detail what this means. Here's what I do. Okay, I don't use this site, but I use this same markup validation. But what I've done is I've actually installed the W3 School validator. Okay, and I have it installed. And I'll just show you here how it works. So in case you want to do this, I just think it's a better workflow. When I have an HTML file open and I've done this work, I can just click on W3C validation, and in that case it shows me it's a valid file. Okay, it is a valid file. Now, also, one thing I don't have open here, and I should have my terminals, because what will happen, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, right, is it actually will end up, if there are problems, it'll give them to you here. This is where you do our Git workflow, and actually I think here I need to drop that. Okay, so this is where you do your Git add star. Now I shouldn't be mixing it here because you do it at different points, but I'm just showing you that when you do your validation, that could be. Matter of fact, if I was to, one of the things Dave does is he gets rid of, and he talks about these elements and their nesting, and if I got rid of one of the tags and I did that, then in that case it should show me an error. Why didn't it? Hold on, let me see. Oh, that's such a good reminder, because sometimes, especially, and I, again, a little foreshadowing some of the stuff Dave's going to tell you, because when you do doc type, your validation sometimes will not throw as many errors. But let me just show you, if I got rid of, like right now, okay, if I did my validation, I show that it's a valid file, and that's how I'll grade your file. But if I happen to get rid of some of these, like if I got rid of this doc type and I just undid it and I hit my validation, then I would see all these errors. And it's like, all these errors were caused by just that. And notice how, and Dave talks about this, you see all these squigglies, and all this is telling you is that you have errors in your file. And for me, I'm going to undo it. I'm going to clear it and then do it again, and then I should have, in this case, a valid file. And again, I see it in problems, so sometimes you're moving between here and the terminal when you're doing Git workflow. Okay, come see me if you want to talk more about that. Okay, I'm going to drop this for a minute because I don't use Dave's process. Okay, so then you'll pick up in chapter 2, you'll code along where he adds some metadata into the head section. And then he will load something called a favicon. If you've taken 82, you know I've talked about that. In this case, he gives you a link to it. And then you can just, in this case, right click. I'm going to open it in a new tab. And this is a small file, but it's kind of nice because what will happen, and actually you can see it up in here, is it actually shows you, and you could do you could do save image as, and in this case you'd go to your W2 HTML. Now I will show you in future weeks how to use a common image directory. We'll talk about that later, and then you can just save it there. Okay, so again, a little bit of a preview for what Dave's going to show you. So then he will also, and this is just instruction to say what I just basically showed you. So when you get to this point, after he has shown you that, then you'll talk about fixing errors, adding metadata, and the favicon. And then continue to create the external style sheet, and I'll give you a visual here. That's what this file is, okay? You'll move from having it inline to having an external, which is good. And then you'll create the error they talked about in validation, kind of what I talked about, and then you'll do one final commit before we're done with attendance, okay? So what I'm going to do is stop this video here, give you a chance to digest this, do all that work, do your last, make sure, right, when I grade this, when I grade your work for this, here's what I will look for, right? Did you do all the commits? Did those commits include all the code required to be coded? And you will then, right, so again, there's nothing you need to post. This is where I just go do that. But now we're going to talk about how you get graded for attendance, and I'll pick up on video 2. Hope this helps.